If you shoot Sony in 2026, the problem is not that you do not have enough lenses. The problem is that you have almost too many choices. There are compact primes, creator zooms, GM lenses, Sigma alternatives, APS-C options, wildlife zooms, and professional tools, all promising to be the right one. But the best Sony lens is never the most expensive one. It is the one that fits the way you shoot. So today, we count down 10 Sony E-mount lenses worth buying in 2026, and number 1 is not a normal zoom. Hit subscribe and stay with me, because Alt Buzz Lenses is where we talk lens history, camera systems, and the choices photographers still argue about at 2 in the morning. At number 10, we have the Sigma 18-50mm f2.8 DCDN Contemporary. The first problem is APS-C. Sony's story is not only full frame, and it never was. Bodies like the A6700, the A6400, and the ZVE10 line live in more bags than people admit, and for years, those shooters made do with slow, forgettable kit glass. This lens changes that quietly. A constant f2.8 aperture across the zoom range turns a small, unassuming body into something that can actually hold its own. Whether you're filming a video essay, walking through a market with a camera slung over one shoulder, or shooting a portrait session that needed real background separation and didn't get it. What makes this lens worth mentioning first isn't spec sheet excitement. It's what it represents. It is the lens that makes Sony APS-C feel like a real system, not a smaller doorway you're supposed to walk through on your way to full frame. The build itself backs that feeling up. It carries genuine weather sealing at a price point where that's rarely offered. Its autofocus motor is quiet enough to disappear entirely under video, and the barrel stays compact enough to keep an APS-C body feeling light in the hand rather than front heavy. Of course, it has a ceiling. It is an APS-C lens, and full-frame A7 shooters shouldn't treat it as their standard zoom, and it will never replace a fast prime for a blurred background or a telephoto lens when the subject won't come closer. But for the photographer building their first serious Sony kit, this is where confidence starts. But once we move into full-frame, the first problem stops being image quality. Sometimes it's simply whether you're willing to carry the camera at all. At number 9, we have the Sony FE 40mm f2.5G. The second problem is carryability, and it's a problem more serious photographers admit to than you'd expect. Not every good Sony lens has to be big, loud, or dramatic. The 40mm f2.5G is small enough to disappear into a jacket pocket, and that changes behavior in a way no spec chart can measure. It's the difference between leaving the camera at home and bringing it along almost by accident, because it no longer feels like a decision. This lens earns its place on this list for what it does to your habits, not your image files. Street photography, travel, quiet family moments, documentary framing where a smaller presence changes how people react to you. This is where a compact prime does its best work. Part of that comes down to details you don't notice until you're holding it, a minimum focusing distance short enough for casual close-ups, a stepping motor smooth enough for silent focus pulls on video, and a filter thread size shared across Sony's other small G primes, so one filter kit covers your whole compact setup. It's not trying to be the sharpest optic in the Sony lineup, and it isn't the lens that makes your camera look more professional walking into a room. It's the lens that makes you more likely to bring the camera at all. It isn't a low-light specialist. It won't compress a portrait the way a longer lens will, and it has no business at a wildlife shoot or a paid sports assignment. It is a portability lens, and it knows exactly what it is. A compact prime makes the camera easy to bring, but a modern zoom is what makes it useful across an entire day. At number 8, we have the Sony FE 20-70mm f4G. The third problem is hybrid travel, and this is where Sony quietly rewrote an old assumption. Standard zooms have started at 24mm for decades. This one starts at 20, and that extra width on the wide end matters more than it sounds like it should. Interiors stop feeling cramped. Landscapes breathe. handheld video gets room to move. For a generation of shooters who photograph and film in the same afternoon, that width can matter more than another stop of light. This is the zoom built for the way cameras are actually used now, not the way they were used when the 24 to 70mm range became the industry default. It also happens to be one of the lightest full-range zooms Sony has ever released, which matters more on a 10-hour travel day than any chart admits. Its minimum focusing distance gets close enough for casual product or detail shots without a dedicated macro lens, and the manual focus ring has enough resistance and precision to double as a genuinely usable focus control for run-and-gun video. Travel, environmental portraits, vlogging-style framing, documentary work where you don't have time to swap lenses between a wide shot and a medium one, this lens covers the ground most hybrid shooters actually live in. At f4, it isn't chasing the darkest wedding reception or the tightest subject separation, and it was never meant to. It trades maximum blur for flexibility, and for most people building a single travel setup, that's exactly the right trade. Then there are moments when wide-angle work ceases being casual and starts demanding professional speed. At number 7, we have the Sony FE 16 to 35mm f2.8 GM2. The fourth problem is professional width, and this is where GM still means something. Landscapes, architecture, interiors, weddings, gimbal work, professional video, these are places where wide coverage isn't a creative choice. It's a requirement, and hesitation isn't an option. The 16 to 35mm f2.8 GM2 exists for photographers and filmmakers who need that width to be fast, sharp, and dependable every single time. This isn't a casual recommendation, and it was never meant to be. A professional wide-angle zoom solves a fundamentally different problem than a compact travel lens does. It gives you speed and coverage in environments where width simply isn't optional. Real estate interiors, architectural documentation, storm chasing, environmental storytelling where the whole scene has to fit. Compared to the lens it replaced, this version shed a noticeable amount of weight, while somehow improving corner sharpness wide open. It uses dual focus motors that keep autofocus fast and near silent even at close range. And its front element resists flare well enough to shoot directly into hard sunlight without the image falling apart. It is expensive, and many casual Sony shooters will be perfectly served by something smaller, slower, and considerably cheaper. This lens isn't for them. It's for the photographer whose wide-angle work has already become part of their serious output, not their occasional experiment. But for most Sony shooters, the real heart of the kit isn't ultra-wide. It's the standard zoom, the lens that quietly covers most of the actual work. At number 6, we have the Sigma 24 to 70mm f2.8 DGDN2 Art. The fifth problem is the standard zoom, and this is the workhorse chapter of the whole list. The 24 to 70mm f2.8 range covers more real, paid, unglamorous photography than almost any other focal length. Weddings, events, portraits, travel, street work, family sessions, client projects. It is the range where most working photographers quietly make their money. Sigma's version gives Sony E-mount shooters that same professional range and speed without automatically defaulting to the most expensive first-party option on the shelf. This lens isn't exciting because the range is unusual. It's the opposite. It's exciting because a good 24 to 70mm f2.8 can genuinely pay for itself. Assignment after assignment, in a way flashier lenses never will. It also arrives noticeably lighter than the previous generation of the same lens. A redesign that professional shooters carrying it all day genuinely notice. It includes a customizable function ring that can control aperture or focus without ever touching the camera body. And its rounded aperture blades keep out of focus backgrounds smooth even at smaller apertures, not just wide open. This is the chapter for Sony shooters building a kit for real work, not just weekend inspiration. It's still a full-sized f2.8 zoom, so don't expect travel lens portability, and it won't replace a dedicated portrait prime, an ultra-wide, or a telephoto when those specific jobs come up. But for the part of photography where the actual paychecks live, this is where the value is. If you're the kind of person who wants to know what a lens actually solves instead of just hearing the same expensive recommendation repeated for the 10th time, that's exactly what we do here. So if you haven't already, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses and stay for the rest of this list. And when people become the main subject, even the strongest standard zoom can't fully replace a proper portrait prime. At number 5, we have the Sony FE 85mm f1.4 GM2. The sixth problem is portraits. And Sony already had strong options here, but this lens represents the modern version of a classic idea. An 85mm f1.4 gives you that instantly recognizable portrait look, real subject separation, a flattering perspective, a working distance that feels deliberate rather than intrusive. The GM2 version sharpens all of that into something built for weddings, fashion, beauty work, and client sessions, where the image needs to feel controlled, not accidental. This isn't the first lens every Sony shooter needs, and it was never positioned that way. It's the lens you buy the moment people become the actual reason the camera is in your hand, not an accessory to the scene, but the entire point of it. Compared to its predecessor, it dropped a significant amount of weight while keeping the same wide aperture. Its 11-blade aperture produces some of the smoothest, most rounded background blur Sony has ever put in a portrait prime, and its autofocus has been retuned specifically to track a moving eye at close range, which matters more in a candid wedding moment than any resolution number does. It is specialized, it is expensive, and in a small indoor space, it can feel too tight to be practical. It will never replace a standard zoom for general coverage or a telephoto for reach. But when the job is people, and only people, nothing else on this list does it quite the same way. But Sony's ecosystem isn't only about portraits and events. The next lens shows how far the system has come for the smallest details in the room. At number 4, we have the Sony FE 100mm f2.8 Macro G OSS. The seventh problem is detail, and this is Sony's commercial and specialist side quietly flexing. Macro lenses aren't only for insects and flowers, whatever the stereotype says. They're for wedding rings catching light on a table, food styled for a menu, textures nobody else would think to photograph, beauty details, still life, studio close-up work where a single centimeter of focus makes or breaks the shot. The 100mm f2.8 Macro G OSS proves Sony isn't only expanding its general-purpose lineup, it's actively strengthening the categories most systems ignore. Macro lenses change what a camera system is even capable of photographing. They take subjects everyone else walks past and make them the entire frame. This particular lens reaches true one-to-one life-size magnification, meaning the subject renders on the sensor at its actual physical size. It carries built-in optical stabilization, rare for a macro lens and genuinely useful for handheld close-up work. And its rounded diaphragm keeps background blur creamy, even in a genre where busy, distracting bokeh usually ruins the shot. This is the lens for photographers who care about precision, close focus, and rendering that holds up at magnifications where flaws have nowhere to hide. It's a specialist tool, not a first lens, and it has no interest in sports, wildlife, or general walk-around duty. But for the photographers who actually need this kind of close-up work, nothing else on this list comes close. But when the subject moves further away again, Sony shooters still need the lens that has survived every single camera generation. At number 3, we have the Sony FE 70-200mm f2.8 GM OSS II. The eighth problem is professional distance, and this is the classic Sony Telephoto workhorse, the lens that quietly built careers. A 70-200mm f2.8 covers weddings, indoor sports, stage photography, outdoor action, compressed landscapes, fashion, documentary work shot from far enough away that the subject never notices the camera at all. The GM2 version isn't here for novelty. It's here for trust. Professional photographers reach for this focal range because it lets them stand back, isolate a subject cleanly, compress a busy background into something simple, and cover a moment that will never happen exactly the same way twice. Against the original version, this redesign cut close to a third of the weight, while somehow improving sharpness across the zoom range. It focuses noticeably closer than its predecessor, blurring the line between telephoto and macro work, and it accepts teleconverters without a meaningful loss in autofocus speed, extending its reach for the moments a standard telephoto still can't cover. This lens isn't exciting because 70 to 200 mm is a new idea. It's exciting because it's the kind of lens a working photographer can genuinely rely on when there's no second take. It's expensive, it's still a large professional tool, and it isn't a casual upgrade for someone who shoots occasionally. But when the moment only happens once, this is what you reach for. But there are subjects that even a 200 mm professional zoom simply cannot reach. For wildlife, birds, and distant action, Sony shooters now have something very different. At number 2, we have the Sony FE 400 to 800 mm f6.3 to 8 G OSS. The ninth problem is wildlife reach, and the answer here is simply distance. A 400 to 800 mm range exists for subjects that will never come closer, no matter how patient you are. Birds, safari animals, aviation, distant action across an open field. This lens matters because it pushes past the familiar 200 to 600 mm range that's defined Sony's wildlife lineup for years and expands what's actually possible without switching systems entirely. The value here isn't speed, and it was never meant to be. It's for the photographer who is tired of cropping heavily in editing and wants to fill the frame in camera, with a subject that has absolutely no intention of getting closer. Despite the enormous focal range, it manages to stay light enough to shoot handheld for extended periods, something wildlife shooters genuinely value on a long day in the field. Its variable aperture is paired with stabilization strong enough to keep handheld shots usable even near the long end, and it maintains continuous autofocus tracking through the entire zoom range, which matters when a bird decides to move, the moment you've found your composition. It's slow at the long end, and it needs good light to really perform. This isn't a portrait lens, an event lens, or something you'd bring on a casual trip. It's a specific tool for a specific kind of patience. But the number one lens on this list isn't here because it reaches the farthest. It's here because it changes what a professional zoom is even allowed to be. At number 1, we have the Sony FE 50 to 150 mm f2 GM. The final problem is category-breaking ambition, and this is why the list ends here instead of somewhere more predictable. The Sony 50 to 150 mm f2 GM is not a normal zoom, and that phrase isn't marketing language. It's the entire point. It sits in a space that didn't really exist before, somewhere between portrait primes, event zooms, indoor sports lenses, and professional hybrid glass. f2, in a zoom, with deep background separation and telephoto compression that used to require carrying 3 separate primes. This isn't number 1, because every Sony shooter needs to own it. It's number 1 because it creates a choice that didn't exist a few years ago. For years, photographers simply accepted that a professional telephoto zoom meant f2.8, full stop, no negotiation. This lens quietly challenges that assumption and gets away with it. Its constant f2 aperture holds steady across the entire zoom range, not just at one end. Its build includes the same level of weather sealing Sony reserves for its top-tier professional glass, and its rendering at close range produces a level of subject separation that genuinely rivals a dedicated prime, which is the entire argument for why this lens exists at all. It behaves less like a traditional zoom and more like a set of fast portrait and event primes that happen to share one body. That's what makes it important, not the number on the barrel, but the argument it makes about what Sony is still willing to build. It's expensive, it's Sony E-mount only, and it stops at 150 mm, so it will never replace a wildlife lens or a 70 to 200 mm for every working photographer out there. It's number 1, because it's category changing, not because it's the most practical lens on this entire list. So here's the real question. If you shoot Sony, What lens actually made the system make sense for you? Was it a small prime that got you out the door more often? A Sigma zoom that paid for itself? A GM portrait lens that changed your client work? Or a telephoto that let you shoot something you never thought you could reach? Tell me in the comments because I genuinely want to know. Sony's biggest strength was never the number of lenses on the shelf. It's the choice itself. And choice only means something once you know exactly what you're solving. Some systems hand you glass. This one hands you a decision, and the smartest lens is still the one that makes your camera feel like it was built for the way you actually see. If that's the kind of story you want more of, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses, and I'll see you in the next one.